Vote counting has continued into the night after polling stations closed in Zambia's presidential and legislative elections yesterday. A close race between incumbent President Edgar Lungu and his main rival, businessman Hakainde Hichilema, has been marred by violence and an internet blackout. Now, this has fueled tensions and suspicions ahead of the outcome expected in 3 days' time. Suzan Mwape is the executive of Common Cause Zambia. She joins us now via video link from the Zambian capital of Lusaka. Suzan, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us here on the AM Report in South Africa. Let's begin perhaps with reflecting on the voter turnout. Scores of people arriving, long lines in some respects that weren't expected. What do you attribute that to?
Well, good morning and thank you for having me on the show. The scores of people are an indication of the will that people want to express through the ballot. It's been a few election cycles we've had in the past where we've had very poor turnout, but this particular election has seen an unprecedented number of supporters turning up. It's also interesting to note that in this particular election, 53% of the voters are young people. So the youths are the majority in the current election, and they have been the most apathetic in previous elections. So we are seeing them really determined to express themselves through the ballot. We can only hope that they were doing a good job, that we won't see a high number of spot and rejected ballots, which was the trend in the last elections at least. And generally, I think they've just been very, very keen. We have a lot of first-time voters. Remember, this is a new register that was developed by the Electoral Commission. We got rid of our odd voters roll, and the Electoral Commission of Zambia had a whole new role, meaning every voter from as far back as pre-independence was added onto a new list.
Yeah. In many countries, it's always thought that young people are enough to sway an election. Is that the same in Zambia? And if so, in which direction do you reckon this particular turnout will sway the outcome?
For this particular election, I would say yes, because our electoral system in Zambia is majoritarian for president. So the president has to get above 50% of the votes. And if you look at the number of registered voters that are currently in this particular election, we have 53%. So if only the youth voted, they can actually determine the president. In terms of who they're swaying, the battle is between the two giants, the ruling party, which is the Patriotic Front, and the UPND, and it could sway either way. The urban voters have been very vocal online. When you look at social media platforms, they've been very expressive. We are yet to get the rural vote for those that do not have access to social media and the platforms that they use to engage.
Take us through the core electioneering issues for this particular poll, Suzan, if you can, while reflecting on the track record that Edgar Lungu has given those core issues.
Okay, so in this particular election, I think we've had an increase in the number of the cases of violence. Just yesterday alone, we had 2 people who died. A Patriotic Front, which is the ruling party, a Patriotic Front chairperson in the Northwestern Province was killed alongside another person. So 2 people died in Northwestern Province. Last night, we heard that the previous mayor of Lusaka Province, who is an aspiring member of parliament somewhere in Lusaka, was stabbed, and that his driver was also hacked. So we've seen an escalation in terms of cases of violence, but also there's a lot of paranoia. There was a lot of paranoia yesterday. We saw a lot of viral videos of scores and mobs of people stopping cars, stopping people suspecting they are carrying marked ballot papers. And even all the cases of those that had been attacked are said to have been unsubstantiated by the police, where they had claimed people were found with marked ballot. Those people were found with nothing. So it's been a lot of paranoia and people trying to protect their votes. In terms of what has with the current administration, I think the ruling party has had, I think, the largest number of scandals that we've observed. In the past, we've seen things like there were 42 houses that were not claimed, that were found, and it took a very long time before we could know who the owners were. We saw the government procuring 42 fire trucks at the cost of $42 million. Each fire truck cost about $1 million. We've seen the development of toll gates at extremely high costs. And there's also been in this administration as well unprecedented development in terms of infrastructure. We've seen a lot of hospitals, roads, bridges being built, but most of these have been at the expense of the taxpayer. And we've also seen an increase in debt in the country. We recently defaulted on our debt, and the debt portfolio of the country has really, really gone up. So those are some of the challenges that we have been facing under the current administration.
Right. It's interesting, Lungu and Hichilema voting at different polling stations yesterday, but both confident that they'll win, and perhaps with good reason. Given the tensions in the country, do you reckon a runoff election could still be held, or is the situation too precarious for the, I guess, elongation of this poll?
Well, a runoff is a possibility now because the results have only started coming in now. But if you look at the voting patterns over the past few years, we have always known what the strongholds of the ruling party have been and of the UPND. However, in this particular election, things seem to be very different because the mood on the ground is slightly different. With the high number of new voters, it will be very interesting to see. Maybe when we get at 50% of the vote count, we can get a sense. But a runoff is certainly a possibility.
The internet blackout is without a doubt one of the issues making headlines internationally. For, again, an international audience, get us a sense of the impact this is having within Zambia itself. I mean, for one, you've already mentioned that there's increased paranoia within that country itself. One would imagine that something like this would fuel that.
Yeah, the internet blackout is something that we anticipated. We did anticipate an internet shutdown. We didn't think it would be so soon anyway. And I think it has had a negative impact in the sense that people believe that there are things that they are trying to hide, or there's information that the government doesn't want people to access. The fact that there's been an internet, it's not even clear what has necessitated that blackout, because what most Zambians use is WhatsApp and Facebook. WhatsApp was down, and that is the medium within which people used to communicate what is going on around the country. So in its absence, we've seen a rise in the number of people using VPNs. Yesterday alone, we saw a lot of messages coming around telling people what to do to download virtual private networks so that they can access the internet. A lot of them are back and making jokes, but I'm not sure whether that message has been lost on the people in the grassroots. And those are the people who are channeling information upwards. So for the organizations that are doing things like parallel voter tabulation and everything else, they're using a text message. So that may not necessarily affect them, but in terms of providing evidence for the things that are happening, such as videos and images, they largely depend on Facebook and WhatsApp, and both are down. The effect has not been good. It's just contributing to, it's heightening suspicion amongst citizens and voters.
Absolutely. You work for an organization that looks into promoting some kind of inclusive participatory governance. A whole lot more people actually rocked up to take part in these polls. But do you get a sense that there's an increase in the trust in democratic systems in Zambia, given the many issues we've ventilated around what might actually compromise the integrity of this poll?
Well, the challenges with the polls started some time back. I would say that the manner in which most of the processes of this electoral cycle have been undertaken have been quite unconsultative. The electoral management body has not done a good job in building consensus amongst citizens. For instance, we started as far back as the voter registration process, where we saw a new register being developed within a short period of time. To date, we believe a lot of people have been disenfranchised as a result of that short period within which a whole new role was developed. Secondly, a number of laws have been adjusted in the Electoral Process Act, and the things that govern the electoral process have changed. There hasn't been so much awareness raising around those issues. For example, yesterday in the polls, there were certain areas that were using the biometric voter device the electoral management body deployed a sample of those. And in some places, people thought that those devices were meant to rig elections because they did not understand what role they were playing or how they were just there to help voters be identified much quicker. So there hasn't been much awareness done in some instances. Voter education has been limited, and it may have an impact on the overall polls in terms of people voting correctly. For example, in some parts of the southern part of the country yesterday, we heard that there were polling stations that were saying they had run out of ballot papers because there was a big number of spot votes. There were lots of people who were voting wrongly and asking for additional ballot paper. So that created a problem as well.
Edgar Lungu has the benefits of incumbency, and that's why he might be well known to even an international audience. What do we know about his main rival, and what works in his favor during a poll like this?
Well, I think he has really managed to capture the hearts of the young people. And I'm talking about the UPND. He used social media greatly, I think, long before the campaign period began. And so he was coined, he's been very, he's been very sassy with young people. Young people seem to gravitate towards him. They call him Bali. Bali means father. It's, street language, these young people that use. So there was a time he went online and said, okay, I don't understand. People keep telling me Bali. What does it mean? When people explain that to him, he says, therefore I'm Bali. So he calls himself Bali. And he seems to work with young people. His campaign this time around has been different. In the past, he's been more somebody who discusses macroeconomics at a higher level, but he seems to have connected very well with the grassroots and the young people who are the majority of the voters. I think other than that, it's also the experience. He's been in the opposition for a very long time. Edgar Lungu is not his first opponent. He's tried his chance at running for president. So possibly this may be his best chance to actually win the election in this particular cycle. However, the current incumbent has been his rival before and has won, and also he too stands a strong chance of winning because he understands the system. What has been disappointing, though, is the bringing out of the security forces. For this is the very first time in the history of Zambian elections that we have seen the military coming in to reinforce the police on election day, pre, during, and even in the post-election phase. So this has been a little bit problematic because we saw a few footages again yesterday on election day where we saw a little bit of police brutality, people being whipped on a queue by police officers. So, it has been giving us also a sense of discomfort.
And I wonder what that means for the people's ability to accept the outcome of this poll. Suzan Mwape, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us here in South Africa. Suzan, live to us there from the Zambian capital of Lusaka. Once again, thanks very much indeed. Suzan is the executive of Common Cause Zambia. It's an organization that looks to foster, if you like, sustainable and democratic involvement in things like governance and elections.